Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name is Allie, and today I am going to be giving book recommendations based on the super specific requests that you guys all sent to me. So I asked on Instagram and YouTube and I got a couple of responses, and I have a little stack of books here and some on my phone that I want to recommend. So the first request that I'm going to be answering is from YouTube, and they said it would be interesting to see more niche romance recs. So the first book that I would like to recommend for this request is Accidentally Engaged by Farah Haran, and I read this book, I want to say, was it 2 years ago? And I feel like I didn't really hear a lot about this book when it came out, but I really enjoyed it. And basically it's about this woman, and she is really into baking and cooking, and she wants to enter into this competition, but because this is sort of a couples competition, she needs someone to pretend to be engaged to her, and she ends up asking the man that her parents kind of set up for her. But at the moment she's not really interested in actually getting engaged and actually getting married, so they kind of have to keep up this ruse. And it's a romance book, you know what's gonna happen, but I really enjoyed this one, and it had some like funny and cute little twists to it. It's not quite as cookie cutter as it might seem, so definitely go into this one with an open mind, and I think you might really enjoy it. Another romance that I felt like is a little bit more niche and isn't really talked about as much anywhere in the book community would be The Banned Bookshop of Maggie Banks by Shauna Robinson. And I really enjoyed this book when I read it last year, and basically it is about the titular character Maggie Banks, and she is trying to figure out her new job. She needs to figure out where she belongs, and so she ends up going to help out one of her best friends and her struggling bookstore. And it's interesting because this bookstore is situated in a town that is basically obsessed with not necessarily one of the founders of the town, but someone very famous and important in the town. And the bookstore that she goes to help with is actually one that caters mostly to books that were published before the time of like the famous writer of the town was publishing his books. So they're all really old books, nothing modern, and that's kind of part of why the bookstore is struggling. I felt like in this book the romance was kind of secondary to the main plot, but I did really enjoy this book, and I think that it's one that will appeal to a lot of people. The last book that I want to recommend for this request would be Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Monaghan. And I read this book last year and I absolutely loved it. I think this might be my favorite out of the bunch. And I think it's really interesting to see an older main character in a romance. I can't remember exactly how old this main character is, but I believe that she's somewhere in her like mid-30s, late 30s, I believe. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this book. And ultimately what I really loved about Nora Goes Off Script is the fact that it's not like a huge romance, if that makes sense. Like the plot is really kind of secondary to what's at play here. It's really character driven. It's really about this family and Nora and the love interest as well. And basically what happens in this book is that Nora has written a book that is loosely based on her divorce, and it ends up getting picked up by a studio and is going to be adapted into a movie, and they want to film part of it at her actual house. And so the film crew comes to her house, and she ends up meeting the lead in the movie, the one that's playing like the character that's loosely based off her ex-husband. And they kind of have a bit of banter together. They don't totally hit it off right away, but I really loved getting to read through their entire journey of getting to know each other and getting to understand each other better. And I absolutely loved the kids in this book because she has 2 kids and they are written so well, which is really rare, at least in my experience, in adult literature. I feel like so often the kids are written to be either like way too young sounding or way too old sounding for their actual ages. But this one, I feel like Annabelle Monaghan must have children or must like really understand children because she got it perfect. And I don't know, I just love this book so much. I feel like I don't hear anybody talk about any of these 3 books, and I highly recommend them. The next request I have for a recommendation is a romance for someone who doesn't like toxic relationships and is scared of romance. So I have 2 books for this recommendation, and they are actually part of the same series, and that is If the Shoe Fits by Julie Murphy. This is the first one I want to recommend. I love this book so much. It is a loose retelling of Cinderella, and it's part of a series of books that are retellings of very famous fairy tales. I believe that they're all going to be princess retellings, but I'm not quite sure about that. But this one I absolutely loved, and look at my nails. They match the book. Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that. Look at it. It's like nearly the same exact color. But this one obviously is going to follow a very similar plot to Cinderella, but this is a contemporary retelling, and basically it follows Cindy, and she is kind of struggling in her professional life at the moment, but she really wants to be, I believe, a shoe designer specifically, but a designer in general. But like I said, she's having a little bit of a struggle moment, and so she ends up going back home to visit her stepmother and stepsisters. Her stepmother and stepsisters are not necessarily evil in this retelling. I think they're a little bit misunderstood. I think there's some misunderstanding there, but they're ultimately not evil, which I felt really refreshed by. I really enjoyed that. But her stepmother is sort of like a TV producer, I believe, and she is currently producing and casting for a sort of Bachelor-esque sort of dating show, and she ends up convincing Cindy, kind of talking her into it, into joining the show as one of the cast members. And as you can tell, Cindy herself is plus size, so that kind of brings up a lot of different issues with fat phobia, and I felt like it was really beautifully handled in this book. I mean, Julie Murphy is like the queen of writing fat characters, and she does it so well, and I really enjoyed this book. I absolutely loved it. It was so sweet. It's very unintimidating. There isn't a lot of like steaminess to it, so if you're not really into that, this would be a great book for you. And I think it's a really great like starter adult romance book because it is just so unintimidating. And the second book I want to recommend, like I said, is part of this series, and that is By the Book by Jasmine Guillory. And this is the Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I absolutely love this one. I think I might love it a little bit more than Meant to Be, but honestly, they're both so good. Both 5 out of 5 stars for me. And so basically, this is about the main character, Izzy, and she is working in publishing at the moment, and currently she is supposed to be keeping up with and keeping track of one of their like celebrity authors. And this guy is very flaky. He is very like not staying connected to them at all, and no one really knows the status of the book that he is supposed to be writing. So in order to kind of check up on him and see where he's at in his creative process, Izzy is sent to California and has to go and kind of be like, hey, are we still writing this book, or what's gonna happen? And I believe that this guy is like a professional football player, a professional sports person. I can't really remember. But like I said, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so it kind of follows a loose plot of Beauty and the Beast, and she ends up in like a series of unfortunate events. She ends up having to stay with him at his like Santa Barbara mansion. And one of the things I loved about this book was that it was set in my hometown, so it was really cool to get to see Santa Barbara on the page. I feel like I've never read a book that is set in Santa Barbara. I could be mistaken, but I think that this is the first one I've ever read. So it was so much fun getting to listen to it and like hear about all the places I have been to all my life and hear it through somebody else's eyes. She didn't get everything quite right, but it was pretty good, even though like it wasn't like perfect. But yeah, I feel like this is another really great non-intimidating kind of book. Like I said, for Meant to Be, this one's also not particularly steamy, but I felt like the romance was really strong. I loved the chemistry between these two characters, and I loved like the backstory that they both had, and like I felt like this book really went deep into these characters, so I highly recommend it. The next specific request for recommendations that I have is political fantasy. So I have 2 books that I want to recommend for this one, and the first one is The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk, And this one I chose for political fantasy because it's not necessarily the same kind of politics that you would be expecting in fantasy. I feel like when people are asking for political fantasy recommendations or are giving political fantasy recommendations, it's very much like royalty politics, if you know what I mean. Like, it's kings and queens and princesses, whatever. This one is more on like the not lower scale, but like kind of more of like the realistic scale of politics, at least in what we understand of it today. This one has a lot to do with feminism and choice and bodily autonomy. I feel like that's very topical for today, and I really enjoyed this book. I always describe this book as kind of a Bridgerton meets A Handmaid's Tale, so if that kind of interests you, it might be a really good book to read, and I absolutely love this one. It's so beautifully written. And basically in this world, women are not allowed to use their magic, and once they get married, they have this collar placed upon them which completely stops their magic from being able to be used. And the main character is not about that. She has her magic, she wants to be able to use her magic, but she is currently living in a society that shuns women for their magic, and also her parents are financially struggling, and she feels compelled to perform her duty and get married, have a family, and marry into specifically like a rich family. And so I feel like this is the type of political fantasy that is not necessarily talked about quite as much, but I highly recommend it. And it's such a good book, and more people need to read this one. The next book that I want to recommend for political fantasy is a bit more of like the stereotypical political fantasy, but I do love this book. And I feel like I should add one more to this recommendations, but I'll do that after I talk about this one. And that is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. And this is, like I said, more stereotypical political fantasy. Kings, queens, that kind of political machinations. And I loved this book when I read it. I haven't continued with the series, so I will be honest there, but I love this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It follows these two young women, and they are like centuries apart, but their stories intertwine. And it's so interesting. There's so much political intrigue in this book. It's really hard to kind of package up the plot and the synopsis into like a couple of sentences, but believe me, this book is so good. I think I read this book while I listened to Reputation, and that is kind of like the pinnacle of fantasy for me. If I can listen to Reputation while I read it, perfect. I mean, amazing. So I highly recommend this book, and I believe that there's bisexual representation in this one, right? This one is the bisexual representation. Okay, so this is kind of like a last minute recommendation, and this is another book that I feel like is not like the stereotypical political fantasy book, and that is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Debeau. And this is a book that has been translated from French, and amazing, iconic. The series is so good, and this is kind of interesting. It's kind of like in the middle of these two books, I feel like, in like the span of political fantasy, because there is a lot of political intrigue, and it does actually have to do with like the political system in this world, because this book is about Ophelia, and she is from one of the many clans within this world, but she ends up getting betrothed to a member of another clan, and there are these things that are described as floating celestial islands, and these are like the different arcs where the different clans live. And so she is betrothed to a member of another clan on another arc, and she has to move there and meet him and meet his family, and he is part of a very influential family, and he actually kind of works within the government. I feel like this definitely works for that recommendation, and I just love it. I'm just realizing now that I have recommended 2 books with arranged marriages. Maybe that's something I enjoy, I don't know. But this one I absolutely love so much. It's not one that I feel like a lot of people read. I mean, it is kind of popular, but it's not like insanely popular like Six of Crows or whatever. But it's so good. It's so beautifully written. I just love getting lost within this world because it's very much like Beauty and the Beast meets Alice in Wonderland. So if you really like those two stories, you might really enjoy this book. And I don't know, I love this one. I would love to see more people read it and highly, highly, highly recommend it. The next very specific request would be a book to get you out of a slump. And I was just in a slump very recently. I was in a 2-month-long slump. I only read like 6 books in those 2 months, which I know probably doesn't sound like a total slump, but it really sure felt like one. I was struggling to get any book finished, and finally at the start of April, I was beginning to feel more like I was ready to read again. And I read 2 books, so I want to recommend those 2 books. So the first one is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I love Tiffany D. Jackson's books so much. I've only read 2, so I can't necessarily call her like a favorite author, but she is an author that I would read anything from. I love her writing. I love the plots that she comes up with. I love the characters that she creates. And this one I felt was just like, I felt it. I got so angry reading this book while I was in the car heading up north, and I loved it. It really, really shook me out of my reading slump. And basically this book is about Enchanted, and she wants to be a star. She wants to write her music, she wants to perform her music, she wants to be a recording artist, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. Unfortunately, she comes into contact with a very prominent, very popular, I believe, R&B artist, and he is a little bit older than she is. I believe that she's 17 in the book, turning 18, and he is in his 20s, so automatically red flag. He takes a very particular interest in her and decides to take her under his wing, and slowly but surely he brings her closer and closer into his circle and further away from her family. I believe that it's loosely based off of the whole R. Kelly situation, sexual predator R. Kelly, but the author also said in her author's note that it's not just about R. Kelly, it's about, you know, like the culture within the music industry, that this has happened time and time again. I feel like this is a great book to read if you really enjoy it. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. And it's not exactly the same, but they do follow the same theme of exploitation in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry. So highly, highly recommend this book. And it totally got me out of my slump. And honestly, I think that any of Tiffany D. Jackson's books will do that for you. The other book that I read that I felt like really got me out of my slump was Adelaide by Genevieve Wheeler, and I loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It made me feel things, but it's true. This book made me feel everything. I cried so much while reading this book, and I absolutely loved it. I had seen a couple of other people read it and love it. I haven't really seen it get to like a huge amount of popularity, but I feel like it's such a good book that I could totally see it really taking off. And this one is about Adelaide. She is in her mid-20s. She is an American living in England, and she ends up meeting this guy named Rory, and they have a pretty tumultuous relationship. She is very sweet and very loving and wants to give people her love. And Rory is the kind of guy who has gone through a lot in the past, and he's really keeping people at an arm's distance. And Adelaide is no exception to that. I loved Adelaide as a character. I don't necessarily fully relate to her, but there are definitely some aspects of her character that I was like, I really see myself in that. And then you have Rory, and I hated him. I hated him so much. And I feel like that's kind of the key to getting out of a reading slump, is really enjoying a book but also having super strong feelings about it, which you can never really predict whether you're going to have strong feelings for a book or not. I feel like that's something that really creeps up on you and takes you by surprise, so you can't really plan it. But I feel like this book, at least in my experience and from what I've seen from other people's reviews, it also made them feel a lot of things. So it might be a really great book to read if you want to get out of a slump and if maybe books haven't really been giving you any strong emotion, this one might be a good choice to land on. The next very specific request was fictional royalty / medieval time books you love. Similar books to shows Reign and The White Princess. So I have to be honest, I don't read a lot of books that are similar to those movies. Movies. I've seen Reign. I love Reign. It's a show. But I personally have not read a lot of books like that, which is weird because I love Reign, like I said. I love the Tudors. I love the Borgias. Like, why have I not read more books like that? That's so weird. But I did read a book in high school that I have reread multiple times since then that I absolutely love, and nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody has ever talked about it. And that is The Other Countess by Eve Edwards. This one is set, I believe, in the 1500s. Okay, 1582 in England. That's what it says. Also, can you see how old this book is? The pages are yellow. I bought this book when I believe I was like 16 or 17. So it's a pretty old book. It's honestly in great condition for being that old, but I loved this book so much. I was obsessed. I quoted it on Tumblr all the time. It was amazing. It was iconic. I think I might have to read the synopsis though in order to explain what is going on in this book. It says, Ellie, Lady Eleanor Rodriguez, Countess of Saint Jaime, possesses a worthless title, but her feisty spirit captivates the elite of Queen Elizabeth's court, especially the dashing new Earl of Dorset. William Lacy, Earl of Dorset, has inherited his father's title and his financial ruin. Now Will must seek a wealthy bride and restore his family's fortune. If only he hadn't fallen for the beautiful but penniless Ellie. Sparks fly whenever Ellie and Will are together. However, circumstances and the conniving interference of others threaten to keep them apart. Every 21st century book lover will fall in love with The Other Countess, the first novel in Eve Edwards' sumptuous historical romance series set in intrigue-filled Elizabethan England. I personally have not read the rest of the series because it follows other characters and I just was not interested in the other characters. But oh my gosh, I wish that I had like just written down which pages were like my favorite parts, like my favorite lines. But I love this book so much, and it's one that I feel like would appeal to so many people. It's very much Reign. Like, if you like Reign, you're gonna like this book. It just is what it is, and it's so good. I love this one. I need to read more books like this though. I mean, this request definitely proved to me that I'm like, wow, I really don't read a lot of historical fiction that is set in this time period. So that is going to be on my list of things to fix. The next request that I got was for books that made me cry, and I could make an entire video just on this topic, and I think that I will at some point, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of it. So we're going to recommend two books. The first one is one that I need to reread immediately, and that is Beach Read by Emily Henry. This book is in like the top 5 books that have made me cry. I don't know if I've cried harder at another book. Maybe The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but this one is such a close second. It is such a close second. I cried so violently while reading this book. Like I was reading it on the beach, and I was like in tears. Like I was like having to sit like this, like just like hide my face while I tried to read this and cry. Basically, it's about the characters Augustus and January, and they are both writers. They know each other from a writing program that they were in together a long time ago. They never really got along. However, through a series of events, they find themselves in the same little beach town and kind of have a sort of reunion and come up with this little bet to see which one can write the other's genre better. January is like a romance author and Augustus is more of like a literary fiction author. So they just kind of want to battle it out between the two genres. And it was so interesting and so much fun, and it was such a different kind of romance than anything that I had read before. It's definitely more of a plot-driven romance and more of a character-driven romance. There is a little bit of steam in this book, but it is not like the main purpose of the book. If you love Folklore by Taylor Swift, this is the book for you. It is so folklore coded, and Cardigan, August, all of those songs, The One, all of them fit perfectly in this book, and I love it. It's iconic. You need to read it. The next book is another one that made me cry. It's probably somewhere in the top 5, maybe top 10, and that is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. If you're a writer and you have not read this book, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's in the title. Writers, read this book. If you're a writer, you will heavily identify with this book. I can almost guarantee it. This book tore me apart in the best way. I loved it. It was so iconic. This is another one that I feel like is kind of like folklore evermore coded. It really fits into that sort of feeling, that sort of vibe. Also, this book is set in the 90s, and I also feel like if you are a fan of Nora Ephron's movies, this might be a good one for you. If you like When Harry Met Sally, this might be a good book for you. If you like You've Got Mail, might be a good book for you. You see where I'm going with that. It's set in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the summer of 1997, and it follows Casey, who is going through a rough patch in her writing, and it's specifically because of the death of her mother. She is heavily grieving. She doesn't really know where her life is headed. She doesn't really know what she's doing, and she needs to find some focus and direction, and really wants to get back into writing. And so this book kind of follows her journey through that, and also her experience of falling in love, being in these relationships, in these like more adult relationships, and it's so good. It's so good. I love this book so much, and I feel like this book has kind of found its niche in the book community, but I feel like even more people would love this book if they gave it a shot. So if you're a writer, if you like the 90s, if you like folklore, if you like Nora Ephron, read this book. It's perfect for you. Okay, so those are all of my recommendations. I do have more requests in here, but I had too many books to talk about already, so I couldn't necessarily get to all of them. So if I didn't get to yours, I am so sorry. Maybe I will do a part 2 of this at some other point and include those in there, but these are the books I really wanted to talk about, and I hope that you all enjoyed it. I hope that you found some new books to read, some ones that are a little bit different than other recommendations. If you would like to see any other recommendations videos from me, if you have anything, like if you want like spring recommendations, summer, if you want to see more of the books that have made me cry, anything like that, let me know down below, and I will definitely take those into consideration. I really love getting to do recommendations videos because I feel like I don't do them very often, so a lot of the recommendations I give are in my wrap-ups, or like even like a vlog. So it's kind of fun to gather them all into one video. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this one, and if you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, Storygraph, TikTok. All the links will be down below, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye! Ooh,